So thank you so much for the invite. I'm really looking forward to giving this presentation, and I'm really happy to see so many of my collaborators in the audience who will be keeping me right if I go off topic. So my name is Yvonne Skipper. I am one of the senior lecturers in the School of Education, but I'm a psychologist. And today I'm going to be talking to you about some of the work I've been doing on mindset-based interventions in the classroom. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the theory of mindsets for those of you who aren't aware of it. And then I'm going to talk about 3 different interventions for different age groups, which I've used, and some of the research I've done on that. So the first thing I want to invite you to think about is, how do you think about intelligence? Do you think that you can learn new things, but you can't really change your basic intelligence? Or do you think that no matter who you are, you can change your intelligence a lot? Now, these 2 statements are indicative of mindsets, which is a theory developed by Dweck years ago now, but she's been developing it and refining it over the years. So basically, if you agree with that first statement, that intelligence is something that's fixed and it can't really change, then that suggests you have what she terms a fixed mindset. And this is the belief that intelligence is a fixed trait, that some people are naturally smarter than others, things just come a little bit easier to them, and that even though you can learn new things, you don't actually get smarter. So we have a certain amount of intelligence and you can learn new things, but we've all got kind of a given amount of intelligence. On the other hand, some people have a growth mindset. So if you believe more of that second statement, you believe that intelligence is malleable, that it can be greatly changed with effort. So you don't just learn new things, you actually grow your intelligence. So these 2, we tend to present them as 2 kind of separate things, but they are on a continuum. So you could be a very fixed mindset person, a little bit fixed or a little bit growth, and you'll fall somewhere along this continuum. And our mindsets affect a lot of different things about us. So here's some of the things they've been associated with in the literature. So some people believe that intelligence is a fixed trait, which is this fixed mindset idea. If you believe this, then you tend to be the sort of person who wants to appear intelligent. So you want to do things that show that you're one of the smart kids. So you will avoid anything that's going to be a little bit challenging to you because you don't want to fail or to do something that makes people think, oh, you know, maybe you're not one of the smart ones. So you tend to avoid taking on challenges. You do things that are within your comfort zone because then you know you can do them well. When you do something that's a little bit more challenging, you're more likely to give up because it's an indication to you, or maybe I'm not smart enough to do this, maybe I'm not smart enough to do algebra, I'm just not that sort of person. So people with fixed mindsets give up quite quickly because any sign of a challenge is a sign that you might not be smart enough to do it. People with fixed mindsets also don't really like having to try hard, like I said, because trying hard is fruitless. If you're not smart enough to do something quite naturally or quite easily, then that's maybe a sign that you're not very smart at all. And quite often people with fixed mindsets see the success of others in a more threatening way because they're trying to show that they're one of the intelligent people. The success of others isn't inspirational, it's potentially damaging. They've managed to do this, but why can't I? So you can see the fixed mindset is associated with behaviours that we're not typically trying to develop in our classroom. Whereas growth mindsets, the idea that intelligence is a muscle and that it can grow and change, are associated with more positive behaviours. So for example, they're associated with a desire to learn. If you have a growth mindset, you believe that if you're not learning something new, why are you bothering to do it? So people with this sort of view tend to be focused on their learning more than their performance. I want to actually know how to do R, for example, not that I just need to know how to pass my exam. They tend to take on challenges because they believe, well, if I'm working hard on something, then that means my brain's growing and I'm getting smarter. So they tend to like challenges because that's an opportunity to learn and to grow and to try new things. When they fail, they tend to feel not positive. Nobody loves a failure, obviously, but they tend to be a bit more persistent in the face of setbacks. They tend to not take it quite so hard. They tend to keep trying. They tend to engage following failure. And they tend to think that effort is the key to success. They have control over their success. And lastly, they tend to be inspired by the success of other people, because if you can see someone else who's worked hard and got to where you want to be, then why can't you do that too? So mindset affects a few different learning behaviors. They also affect how we experience successes and failures. So if you are a fixed mindset person, you tend to think, I've succeeded, and you attribute that to something internal to you. I've succeeded because I am clever. And that leads you to feel very positive about yourself, very positive about your achievements, and generally be quite keen to continue persisting. Whereas if you're a growth mindset person, you tend to believe, I have succeeded because I've worked hard. So it's something you've done, not something you are. And actually, when you're succeeding, there's not really much of a difference in those attributions. Although it might seem nicer to attribute to I'm a super smart person, when you're succeeding, there's not really very much of a difference. Everybody feels very positive. Everybody feels good about their performance. Everybody feels good about themselves, and everybody wants to persist. It's not particularly surprising. I think those 10 out of 10 or first class or paper acceptances are all very powerful experiences. So it doesn't really matter why you think you've succeeded, and that's enough. But you do tend to get some differences when you experience failure, which I've touched on a little bit. So if you're a fixed mindset person, you believe I have failed because I am not clever. And that makes you feel sad. So these kids in the classroom are the ones who tend to catastrophize when they fail. So they get one bad mark. Oh, I've never been any good at French. I've never got good marks. You know, they catastrophize previous performance. Even when they've been doing fine, they just can't remember almost those sort of positive experiences. So they feel very bad about themselves. They also feel like they're bad children as well. So particularly young children find it difficult to pull apart bad at school and bad person. So they quite often feel very negative about themselves. And these are the kids who stop persisting. I'm not clever enough to do this, so I'm just not going to try. So they might completely disengage. They might come up with various ruses to not have to keep trying. So they might, start messing around or not really put the effort in anymore because they don't want to fail. It's an indication of them not being smart enough. Whereas people with more of a growth mindset believe I have failed because I didn't work hard. And that leads to determination because it's something you can control. So it's about hard work, it's about technique, it's about the things you do. So kids with more of a growth mindset when they fail think, well, okay, I failed, but I've done all right in the past, and here's some things which I can do to improve. And so quite often you see these kids move forward in quite a determined way. They keep persisting. And this is interesting because sometimes when you do this sort of research, you create experiences of success and failure in the kids. And sometimes you'll find that people who are very, very growth mindset will actually succeed in the failure conditions because they really dig deep and achieve what they shouldn't be able to because of their age group. So that, in a nutshell, is what the difference is between fixed and growth mindsets. I know some of you will be familiar with this, but I wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page before we moved on to the interventions. And so when I first kind of started researching this topic, I thought, well, okay, this sounds good. Growth mindset sounds like something that we should be promoting in our students. It's associated with all these positive behaviors. So what can we do to promote it? So there's 3 interventions I'm going to be talking about today. One is a direct intervention, which I used with university students. The second is an intervention for young children. And then lastly, a writing-based intervention, which is the Whitewater Writers Programme. So first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about the mindset intervention, which I did some work on with university students. So what got me thinking about this was I was thinking, well, okay, this growth mindset is an interesting thing. Maybe we could try and promote it in university students. And I thought, let's try and get hold of them in year 1. Because when you transition to a new educational environment, we've got an opportunity there. Like, you don't know what makes someone a smart university student. Is somebody gifted, or is it that they work hard and that's going to mean that they do well at university? So I thought I want to try and get hold of first year students, and I want to try and promote this sort of view that we're all on our learning journeys, we're all improving, and the focus, particularly in first year, where so long as you pass, you can move on to second year. It's a safe space to take risks, to learn new things, and to really focus on your learning journey rather than constantly being fixated on marks. So I developed this intervention, which I gave in the first year seminars. So they did seminars in year 1, which were based on psychology. So it was quite a nice way to bring this in a natural way. It didn't feel a million miles away from what they were doing anyway. And I created 2 kind of PowerPoint presentations. One was about growth mindsets. It was a bit more implicit than that, though, because it was very much focused on how your brain changes when you learn new things and brain plasticity. Whereas the control group did a similar sort of thing, but we focused on memory in general. So what memory is, how it works, and different ways in which we can promote good memory. So I had 80 students. 3 seminar groups were in the intervention group and 3 in the control group. And I basically had them come in, I gave them a quick questionnaire, I then gave them an hour-long presentation, and then I gave them a questionnaire at the end. So very light touch, very simple. I just wanted to see, can we actually impact this at all? Or is it by the time you get to uni, you're like, no, this is what success is, I've got my mindset, I'm not really very here. As I said, the teaching group did some slides on plasticity, effort and technique, and the control group did some work on hacks. And it was, I mean, there was similar sort of like layouts. So they had like a general introduction, some actual research studies. They all had an activity to do to try and make it as similar as possible. So here's a couple of the slides from the intervention. So here's a famous study from 2006, where basically what they did is the researchers were interested in looking at how your brain changes when you learn new things. So they studied the images of the brains of medical students 3 months before their exams and again after their exams. And this was compared to the brains of students not studying for their exams at this time. And what they found was that there were changes in the parietal cortex and posterior hippocampus, which basically means that these are areas which are known to be involved in memory, retrieval, and learning. So their brains changed by the studying which they were doing. And all students showed changes in this, which is reassuring because hopefully all of them are learning all the time, but these changes were most significant for the people who were working towards their exams. So students who were really focused on getting that information in and retaining it, their brains changed the most. So you can see here, this is a focus on a growth mindset idea that your brain can be changed by your learning and that we can grow our intelligence or grow our brains. What I did as well was measured the students' mindset. So there are lots of mindset questionnaires out there. We used the typical Carol Dweck one. I measured task choice. So I said to them, in your next seminar, you'll get the choice of 2 activities. One will be something quite simple. You'll probably get it all right, but you won't learn new stuff. And the other one is more complicated. You'll make some mistakes, get some things wrong, but you will learn something new. So I wanted to see how interested they were in kind of performance. I want to all right and show up versus I want to learn something sort of ideas. And then goal orientation, similarly, I want to look at, do you care about getting a first class mark or do you care about improving what you learn? And what I found here, just very briefly, is these sort of greeny bars are the control group. So you can see there is no change in the control group in their mindset, no change in the task that they chose, complexity of the task, and no change in their goals. You would expect this, they were just learning about memory. There was nothing about brain plasticity, so no changes there. But we did find that the intervention group showed more of a growth mindset, were more likely to choose difficult tasks, and were more likely to focus more on their learning than their grades. So that suggested to me, well, okay, that's only an hour's work, and we've managed to make some sort of changes. So, potentially there is something there. But of course, that's very short term. I've kind of tested them before and then after very, very quickly. I don't know how this is going to play out in the long term. I don't know how it will play out in, the broader context as well, because this is my, my seminar groups where I'm able to control some of the environment, but obviously students are aiming for a first class degree or a 2-1 because that allows them to get into the future training that they want. So I thought it would be interesting to follow these sorts of things in the longer term. And I also thought, well, working with uni students is good. I got a teaching innovation piece of funding to do this work. So, that is useful to do, but if these benefits are so good for students, then why are we waiting till university to do them? Why aren't we targeting kids earlier on? Now, there are quite a few growth mindset interventions which exist and a lot of them are focused on secondary school students. And we thought, well, actually, what if we started younger? What if we could kind of start doing this very, very early years when kids first come to school? And so that's what we decided to do with this mindset intervention with young children, which I worked on with Nick Garnett, who is in the audience somewhere. So hi, Nick. If I get the graphs wrong, you can tell me about it. So what basically happened with this project was that we were interested in looking at literacy in Stoke-on-Trent. So Stoke-on-Trent, I was at Keele University before I came to Glasgow University. And we were interested in the city on that there's quite low literacy levels in Stoke. So there's a lot of kids who are coming to school who are speaking and finding it very difficult to read. And so I got talking to Janet, who's pictured at the bottom there, and she was telling me about some of the citywide work with a group called Stoke Reads, which was a citywide project where teachers and speech and language therapists and all different groups were coming together to share good practice. So what are we doing that's going to improve our kids' reading? So there was work on phonics, there was work on teaching skills, there was work on libraries, all sorts of different things to really bring people together and to really create a buzz about reading. And so I met Janet at an event, and we were talking about this, and I talked about some of my work on mindsets. And then we thought, well, actually, what about if we combine these things? What if we have this solid teaching on how to teach phonics and how to teach reading, but then we also had this idea of mindsets, that you can grow how clever you are and how good you are at reading, and that anybody can improve their reading. Because I think sometimes you get this kind of idea like kids like us don't do stuff like that. So it's kind of to try and raise their aspirations and their kind of belief that they can change their literacy as well. So I worked with, as I said, Janet and Nick, and we created this project for the city. Now in this, we really wanted to use a co-creative approach. So quite often in academia, I think we as academics will design interventions and we'll trial them in a very controlled way, and then we'll push them out to schools. And I mean, this approach can work, but for me, co-creation is a really powerful approach. And this is where academics and partners work together and share their knowledge. So, for example, I do not teach 5-year-olds all day, every day. I think that people who do are wonderful, but to me, that sounds very challenging. I don't know what goes on in typical schools. I don't know what most of the problems are. I don't know what the resources are. I don't know what the national curriculum is right now. And so co-creation is when academics and practitioners work together to really try and create something that's going to be really beneficial. So they think about, you know, the challenges, they think about the research, they think about the control, and they really come together to try and draw on the expertise of both to create interventions that really will make a difference. And also there is a lot of research suggesting that co-created interventions are more likely to be taken up by partner organisations because they feel like they've been involved in it, because the interventions take into account other pressures or, you know, other things that they might need in order to do it effectively. So we were really keen to use this co-creative approach in designing this intervention. So we developed the Stoke Reads Mindset Toolkit. At the end of this presentation, I've got a bunch of links which I'll leave up, so you can take a look through some of these things and utilise them if you'd like to. They're all freely available. And what we wanted in this was a standalone product that would have reasonable lifespan without requiring updating. And we didn't want to have to do lots of training. So we didn't want to have to run lots of sessions for teachers to be able to pick this up and leaf through it. That was really important to us, and I'm really glad we took that decision, because now with all the funding cuts and things, the project would have been very short-lived if we hadn't done that. So I'm really glad that that was the approach we took. And it's also very minimal resource. You don't need a whole bunch of stuff to do this. You literally pick it up. It's got activities, it's got books you can read. So it's very light touch. You don't need anything really to implement this approach. So here's what it looks like on the inside. You can see it's very nice and brightly colored as well, because we didn't want it getting lost in piles of A4 paper. So there's a bit of an introduction to the theory, so that teachers can understand the theory, because sometimes I think when people are implementing growth mindset things, it's not necessarily done in the way that I think Carol Dweck herself would have considered being growth mindset. So it kind of, this describes what growth and fixed mindsets are and what they aren't. It talks about how to implement the approach, so how to do it, ideas about verbal feedback, and then also some lesson ideas to promote growth mindsets. So because this is for very young children, like I said, we were focusing on kids when they first come into school, mainly because, like I said, with the university students, we wanted to look at, well, when students first come to uni, they don't know what success is, but when kids come to school, they even more don't know what success is. So if we can try and hit them right then and create this view, all of us are growing and all of us are learning, then that's going to be really useful. So we've got lots of lesson ideas in here, which include things like books they can read with their Year 1 children, and then some discussion questions around mindsets, some things about successful people. So a few different ideas. And again, the co-creation approach was brilliant for this, because when we first started, Nick and I had cunning plans that we were going to do all these wonderful lesson plans that the teachers could just pick up and use, and it would be really easy. And then when we spoke to the teachers, they said, don't do that. The curriculum's changing all the time. It'll be obsolete within a couple of years. And again, they were completely right. So had we not co-created this, this would already be obsolete. As it is, it's still in use now. So we wanted to test what impact this would have on our participants. So we recruited 9 schools in Stoke-on-Trent, 5 in the experimental group. So five schools were given the Stoke Reads Mindset Kit, and 4 were in the comparison group, and they just did what they usually did, so they didn't change their practice at all across the city of Stoke-on-Trent. Should be clear, the 4 comparison schools were still part of Stoke Reads, so they still were doing the things on literacy and phonics, etc. We had 37 teachers, so 17 in the experimental schools and 20 in the comparison. and we had about 500 pupils. So, not a bad sample size. And we were really lucky as well with the recruitment, because people were involved in the project. They were quite keen to engage with us, and we built those relationships, so it made it a lot easier. And we collected data in June 2016 and June 2017. So June 2016 was when the pupils reached the end of reception year, or primary one, if you're in Scotland. And then at the end of year one, we're just going into primary two, if you're in Scotland. Now, the interesting thing about this project was, because nobody had really looked at mindsets in young children, there wasn't even a measure of mindsets in young children. So the first thing that Nick and I spent months doing was developing a new measure of mindsets in young children, looking at how can a 5-year-old understand amount of intelligence and things like that. So we worked really hard to create a set of measures which are easy to use for children. We measured their learning and performance goals, so whether they were more focused on getting a good mark or whether they were more focused on learning. We got them to do a little activity with an imagined failure, and we looked at how they responded to that imagined failure. We measured theory of intelligence, and we also measured aspiration to see if this would tie into what they wanted to do when they grew up. So, this idea, if you have a growth mindset, then perhaps you want to be Prime Minister, whereas if you've got a fixed mindset, maybe you don't want to set a challenging goal, so it might be lower. The results from the aspiration data were beautiful. We had a lot of kids who wanted to be unicorns. We had many Princess Elsas, and we had a few happies, which actually was, I thought, a really good answer to a question like that, in amongst the usual kind of teachers and doctors. We also tested all these kids on their phonics using PERA. So this is the phonics and early reading assessment, which has 3 components. It has a phonics assessment, a sentence reading, and a reading comprehension. So phonics assessment is basically, can they decode the phonics? So k, a, t, cat, can they use their phonics to do that? Sentence reading, can they read the cat sat on the mat? And then reading comprehension, where did the cat sit on the mat? So it's, first of all, just, can you do the sounds? Are you able to read them? And then do you understand what that really means? So what did we find? Well, I don't want to spend too long on this, but basically our intervention created more of a growth mindset, which improved phonics in kids. So there is some suggestion that by doing this intervention, you got more of a growth mindset, and that led to improved phonics. It also led to slightly improved reading as well, so their ability to read, but it did not impact their reading comprehension over the course of the year. So this kind of suggested to us, well, there's something going on here, but there's a lot more work to be done. So, for example, phonics is a task where you're doing it regularly, and there's lots of different components to it. So you're having a lot of successes and failures. So maybe a growth mindset really helps in that, because if I'm doing k, a, t, cat, s, a, t, sat, there's lots and lots of opportunities for trying different things, and it's not high stakes. If I miss one letter, it's maybe not a disaster. And the same with sentence reading. With comprehension, there's a lot more higher order things going on there. And so there wasn't really an impact on sentence reading. And also, we weren't sure whether this was kind of a direct effect, because theory of intelligence, in a lot of the models, like I showed you, you've got theory of intelligence in the middle, and then you've got all your variables which kind of sit around it like this. But some of the modeling we were doing suggested, well, maybe not actually that theory of intelligence is the super, super important thing. Maybe it's more about responses to failure. Maybe it's more about learning goals. Those 2 things seem to be really, really key. So maybe it's not the mindset itself that's vital. Maybe it's some of the behaviors that we associate with it. So maybe it's not just the mindset, it's other things as well. So, actually, do you want me to stop there and ask if there's any questions for now, Carolina? Would that be useful?
That's great. Yeah. So if this is a good place to stop. Yeah. So if anyone has a question, you can just use the chat to ask your question, and we can then see if Yvonne has a good answer.
I can't promise anything.
No one is really.
No. Okay. Well, we can do questions at the end. That's fine too.
Yeah, that's fine.
I know that everybody's clearly very interested in the ninja that's coming up, so I'll carry on with the fellow. So
yeah, and as you listen, you can really pop in questions in the chat as we go. Thank you.
Thanks. So that then got me thinking, okay, so there seems to be something going on here, but it's maybe not quite the same way in which we've thought about it. It's maybe not all about mindsets. Maybe it's more about the behaviors we associate with the mindsets. And then it got me thinking, well, these interventions are relatively explicit, and maybe they don't need to be. So there's a lot of work, this is why the ninja's there, being done on stealthy interventions. You know, like I kind of like that idea of like being a research ninja and trying to be stealthy and not being kind of like, this is my intervention and here's all these things. You know, some kids I've spoken to do growth mindsets in schools, and the interventions are so strong, and the teachers are really like, you show a growth mindset, that's not a growth mindset, how dare you? And the kids get really fed up with it. You get a kind of message fatigue and you get a kind of pushback against it. And so I thought, well, maybe this isn't about explicit interventions. Maybe there's things we can do that are a little bit more subtle, and are promoting some of these ideas in a slightly different way. So maybe just giving students a chance to achieve an impossible goal might be enough to promote this growth mindset and this kind of learning focus rather than achievement focus. And so that's where we kind of developed the Whitewater Writers program. And again, here's my wonderful collaborators, Patrick Lehman, who's at King Reddington, who runs Equality Time, and who came up with this initial program. So Whitewater Writers is a project which gives groups of people the chance to collaboratively publish a full-length novel in a week. And here you can see some of the covers of our novels. We've done more than 150 of them now. And also Richard is here today, so Richard can answer any questions for you as well, because Richard runs the project full-time now at Keele University. So before lockdown, was in a school basically every week helping groups of young people to participate in this project. So our authors are more than 1,500 people, and we've worked with kids as young as 8 years old all the way up through secondary school and to university students. We've worked with children with SEND, so special educational needs. We've worked with looked after kids. We've done a bit of international work, so some in Ghana, and we also did a book in the Netherlands, was it last year or the year before, which was great because it's all in Dutch, so I can't even read it, but it's a really nice story. And we've also started to diversify a little bit. So we've been working, for example, with a group of siblings of hospice children, siblings of poorly children. And we've been doing some work recently with young and adult offenders as well. So I'm just going to talk you through what this program looks like. So on Monday morning, we go into school, or sometimes we have the kids come up to the university and they're students for a week. And they spend the entire day planning their book. So it's a group of 8 to 10 of them. They come together, they come up with lots of different ideas. They start to kind of develop characters. And then each one of them takes charge of a character. So you might be the hero, I might be the bad guy, someone else might be the evil computer genius. And then each of us has that area of responsibility for taking that character through the book. So basically on Monday, they plan out their book, and then they take, these are called CRC cards. This is how people do computer programming. And they basically write on them what's happening in each chapter. And so you can see a group of students from Keele University here. They are planning out their book. So they're checking, each one of these is a chapter, and they're checking that things don't happen twice and someone doesn't accidentally die twice, or that the plot kind of makes sense. So this is a really important stage for them to make sure that the story all makes sense. And by the end of Monday, they have literally managed to plan out their novel at chapter level. So every single one of those is a chapter, and each one of those is going in the book. Oops. Then on Tuesday, they start to write the novel using some special software we've developed that's a bit like a Google Doc. So they're able to write kind of summary sentences and then fill in for each other. And it's not the case that I write chapter 1 and you write chapter 2. Everybody's constantly moving around. So I might write a bit of chapter 1, a couple of bullets for chapter 1, a couple of bullets for chapter 7, and flick it through. But like I said, the important thing is that each person is in charge of their character's journey through the novel. So on Tuesday, they write the book, and they continue drafting on Wednesday until the end of the day Wednesday, when they basically have a full draft of their novel. Then on Thursday, they start to proofread it. So they go through it, we print it out, they go through it, they make edits and corrections on it on Thursday. And this is the day they don't like, because most of them don't really proofread things very often, and it's very challenging. And by this point, they've been working really, really hard. But they persevere. On Friday, we have a countdown. So they're doing the kind of final bits of proofreading. they're designing the blurb, they're doing all the kind of final tidying bits. There's a countdown for the final 5 minutes, they're all running around frantically. And then we have a celebration, which typically features cakes, which is really fun. And then they also design the covers and illustrations. So some of our primary school books have drawings in them, which the children have done. And they also design the covers. So I've actually got some I prepared earlier here. So here's one which was designed by some secondary school kids. Here's another one. Here's another group. This was a girls' school in London. So they design the covers and the illustrations, and I want to make it really clear that no adult touches a key in this process. The kids do all the writing, all the planning, everything themselves. Quite often at the beginning, they'll say things like, oh, should this happen? Should that happen? But we train our facilitators to just bounce it back. So we set up the activities, but all the content belongs to the kids themselves. They design the cover, as I said, the blurb as well. The books are all put up for sale on Amazon, and the kids get royalty checks if the books sell well. So remember, this is split between 10 authors, so they're not likely to become millionaires, but as far as they're concerned, any money is good money. And you can see here, you know, that they do get reviewed on Amazon, and it's amazing for them to be able to see those reviews coming through as well. And then a couple of weeks later, we do a book signing event. All their friends and family come, the local press, and we celebrate the achievement of the kids. Because it really is amazing to see how they go from basically nothing on Monday to a full-length book. Primary school kids maybe 10 to 12,000 words, secondary kids maybe 24, maybe more. University students are huge, really, really long. I've not got a usual one, but you can see this was written by a group of secondary students, so you can see it's big. They do produce a lot of text. So Whitewater Writers is an example of knowledge mobilization. So every single thing that they're doing during Whitewater Writers is based on things we know in psychology. So for example, we give them all a character to be in charge of. The reason we do that is because we know that when people work together, you get social loafing, which is when a couple of people in the group are maybe a little bit lazy, they're not really pulling their weight. It can be kind of frustrating for other people who think, well, why am I bothering to do my bit if she's not doing her bit? But if every single person has their own character, then each of them has an area of responsibility. So that gets buy-in from the kids. But it also means that if somebody is being a little bit of a lazy waster, their character tends to get smaller and other characters tend to get bigger and do more. So it's a way of encouraging everybody to participate. So basically what we're doing through the program is we're taking knowledge that we know about how people learn, about how people write, about how to get people motivated. And we've designed the program around this to really use that knowledge in a way that helps them to create their novel. And the reason why this is so important is because we know that professional and academic success, regardless of what you do, is in some way based on your writing skills. And so this project is one that we developed to give kids the opportunity, and adults, to write something really special. You know, Nan doesn't necessarily understand that I got a B in my BTEC, but Nan understands I wrote a book. So it gives them the opportunity to write something special and to develop their literacy skills over the course of a week. So the last thing I'm going to just talk through now is a little bit about some of the outcomes of participating in the Whitewater Writers project. So the first study was quite a light touch study because it's very difficult for us when we're doing this to identify a control group, because we're going into a school, we're taking 10 children off timetable with us in a separate room for a whole week. And when we first started, it was quite difficult to encourage schools to be involved because they didn't necessarily believe that we could do it. But now we've got enough books to wave around. They like to have those books on their open days and things like that. So it's getting a lot easier. So the research is progressing. But our kind of first study on this was looking at how the kids who participated developed. So we had a pre-test to post-test design. So this was before they participated in Whitewater Writers, and they did Whitewater Writers for a week, and then they did the post-test. And we measured in 300 kids from 26 schools their writing skills, so how good they thought they were at writing. We measured their communication skills, how good they were at presenting their ideas to other people, how good they were at hitting deadlines, working under pressure, how good they were at working with other people, and then some more psychological variables. So locus of control is whether you feel like you're in control of your life or whether you feel like you're just being kind of washed along with the river type thing. So people who have an internal locus of control feel like they're controlling their lives, whereas people with an external feel like they're being kind of pushed along, they don't have much control. So an internal locus of control is a positive thing. We also measured the self-esteem. So do you feel positive about yourself? And then lastly, we wanted to see, well, how does this impact how you feel about other group members? So does doing whitewateritis for a week and working really quite intensely with people you might not have chosen to work with, does it impact how you feel about working with them again, but also potentially socializing? And I should say all the kids in the study were from disadvantaged backgrounds as well. So not terribly surprising, they tend to think they're better. They tend to think they're pretty good anyway, these kids. So I think it was a 5-point scale. So you see, they all think they're pretty good anyway, but they think they're pretty good at writing, but they get better. They're good at communication, but they get better. They're good at working under pressure, but they get better. And they're good at working in a team. And then they do show more of an internal locus of control. So they feel more in control of their lives. And they do tend to feel more happy about working and socializing with group members. But we didn't really see a change in self-esteem. This might have been because two things. One is that we measured it before the book signing, and it might be that after the book signing, when you see your book on Amazon and your mum has come and you get your book signed by the authors and things, that might have led to it. Or it might be because the measure of self-esteem we used was very global, and we maybe should have used self-efficacy measures, how positive they feel about their writing, how positive they feel about other things. We then wanted to look at, okay, does it impact grades? So we didn't manage to get hold of students' actual grades, but what we did manage to get hold of was their predicted grades in GCSE. So these were kids in England, disadvantaged kids again, and we managed to get the schools to agree to share predicted grades with us. We know that predicted grades tend to remain relatively stable. So if you're predicted a C, you tend to stay predicted a C. They do change sometimes. I'm not saying they never change, but it is a relatively stable measure across groups of people. And also they tend to be quite reliable. So when you are given a prediction at age 7 to 14, they are actually pretty good predictions of your exam performance at 16 to 18 years. So we thought, well, predictions that'll do for the moment. We'll work on actual achievement grades later, but we'll try with predicted first of all, because that seemed to be easier to access from the schools. So we had 130 kids, and these were from year 7 to year 10. So this is S1 to S3, I think. You can correct me if I'm wrong in a minute. And we got teachers to give us their predicted GCSE grades in English at the beginning of the year when they did whitewateritis, and at the end of the year when they did whitewateritis. And this was, again, only kids who did whitewateritis, so we didn't get them from everybody else because we weren't able to access that data, but we do have data from the kids who participated in whitewateritis. Now, there was a significant increase. So before, most of the kids we were working with were predicted a 2.5 to a 3 on average, and at the end of the academic year, they were predicted a 4. So a 4 is a pass in GCSE in England. So, it's clearly having some sort of an impact, but I do agree that there's more work we need to do here to actually get real grades and to have a decent control group, but there is some sort of indication that this is improving the kids' literacy and their achievement. We've also run a whole bunch of interviews, and it's been really fun to do these and to ask kids a little bit about what they feel about their achievements. And here's some of the quotes we've got. When I first started, I didn't believe in myself. Now I do, because it only took a believe in myself. I really enjoyed the workshop, and I'll never say I can't again. That's a lovely kind of growth mindset view that I can get better. I didn't think I could write a book in a week, but I did. Here's a lovely quote, one of my favorites. We're teenagers that have done this, and there's nothing stopping you doing the same. So follow your dreams and you may go far, and tell people about the project because it might make a difference to people's lives. And I'm not taking a B in English. I'm practically J.K. Rowling now, which is just lovely to hear. So we've been working a lot in schools, and we've been really enjoying some of the work we've been doing. So, for example, recently Rich has been running a lot of books where we've asked kids, what's the most important thing to young people at the moment? And they've been able to express some of those ideas. Expressing your ideas through fiction is a very safe sort of way to talk about it, because it's not necessarily you who's being bullied or who is going through this thing. So the kids are able to really express their ideas in a very safe way. And we do have a lot of very touching stories which they're producing. But as well as that, we've been working in different settings. So one of our recent books we did in HMP Liverpool, and we worked with a group of 8 men who we asked to write a book for their children. Now, the idea in this was that a lot of people who are in prison have very low literacy levels. So we thought it might be nice, it would be less stressful to be writing for a younger age group, because there wouldn't be so much anxiety about literacy levels, but also it then functions as a way of linking up the men and their children, because obviously they don't get to see each other very often. So the men themselves produced this lovely story. It's called Mysticus, and the children were able to come in for a couple of different family days and produce all the illustrations. So the kids are all published illustrators now. One of the kids did the front cover. And the story itself is very interesting, because in it there's a couple of characters who are bad guys, but it's made very clear that they're not bad people. So one of the bad guys is described as having very strong feelings which he couldn't deal with very well, and so he made some bad choices. So you can see there's a kind of a way of them talking to the children and trying to explain what's happening. And this was a really enjoyable project. We really enjoyed it, and we got some lovely quotes from the men in the interviews and some quantitative data as well, which I'm analysing now, saying things like, I've never even read a whole book and now I've written one. And the only reason I did this project was to get to see my kids, but it's been amazing. And as well, it had a really positive impact. So we were able to interview others as well. So we were able to interview the kids and the partners of the men, and they were very impressed with the achievement of the men. We had a lovely book signing where all the families were able to come in and get their book signed by their dad. And I heard a lovely story about one of the little girls who, it was World Book Day a little bit after we did this book. And she went into school and she wasn't dressed up, and her teacher said, "Oh, why aren't you dressed up?" And she said, I'm in a book. And her teacher was like, "What are you talking about?" But all of the men wrote their children into the book as characters. So she is actually in a book now. And then her teacher found out about this book, and they've been reading it as one of their class reading books. So it's really a nice way to bring people together. So I hinted at this, just finishing up now, about the therapeutic effect of writing. The kids write about bullying, they write about what makes people evil, they write about being kind, the power of kindness. There's quite often resolutions that involve people sacrificing themselves or doing something unexpectedly good. We see a lot of the power of family and friends. So for the younger children, quite often it's the power of family. For the older children, the family is not necessarily perfect, but the friendship group then become that place where you can grow and you can become your ideal self. And quite concerningly, recently, we've had an awful lot of books about distrust in the government, distrust in science, distrust in general, which is a little bit concerning, but still it shows that, these books are tapping into things that really matter to the kids themselves. So I'd like to close just by saying thank you to all the people who gave us money to run Whitewater Writers. We wouldn't have been able to develop it to this level without all of the funding that we've been lucky enough to receive. And I'd be really happy to take any questions. And also, if anybody is interested in running Whitewater Writers with their groups, any youth groups or adult groups or anybody, we're always keen to have a chat with people. So if you've got any ideas of audiences or groups we can work with, we would be really happy to do that. So that's everything from me. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much. This was amazing. Can you let me just stop your screen sharing here? So. All right. Thank you so much, Yvonne. So we are ready to take some questions from the audience. You can type your questions in, or you can just raise your hand and just turn on your video and ask the question. We had a question before that was here by Face Kameventu, and they ask, what were the other factors that led to success other than the growth mindset? Can you mention it?
Yeah. So like I said, this is something we've been discussing and thinking about a lot. We know that, a lot of the growth mindset literature has not replicated in the way we might expect it to. We know that there's been a lot of large scale meta-analyses which have found relatively low impacts of it. Particularly, they tend to be weaker in adults, slightly stronger in kids. And if you are looking at who it might work for, even though, again, it's relatively small effects, it's typically kids who are high risk or disadvantaged in some way. And all the projects which I've been talking about today, we have worked with high risk and disadvantaged kids. So I think that's why we perhaps have found effects when others haven't. As I mentioned as well during my talk, I think it's not just about mindset. I think it is about your orientation to learning. Do you believe that, are you focused on your grades, or are you focused on your learning? Do you feel safe in your classroom? Do you feel like it's a safe space? I think we quite often talk about safe educational spaces, but sometimes it's like, well, what does that mean? How do we create a safe space for failure. You know, as a teacher, you can be working really hard to create a safe space for your kids, and then SATs come along in year 6, the end of primary school, and they all get tested. And if you're in certain counties, that test impacts exactly what school you can go to. So I think there are some issues there in what is really a safe space to fail. So I think there's some things about learning orientations. I think there are some things about responses to failure. As I said, those two seem to be the ones in the kind of deeper analysis we've been doing. Those two things seem to be the things which are really leading to the change. So I don't think that mindset sits here and everything sits perfectly around it as we might have thought, or I don't think mindset is here and these all things come out and then learning is here. I think potentially mindset is kind of here and some of these other things are here, but there's a lot more modeling to be done. But for me, I don't think we should kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think there is something here. I've been lucky enough to work at Stanford with Carol Dweck in her lab for a little bit. And I think sometimes mindsets aren't always well understood because it seems like a very simple idea, but there are nuances to it. So for me, I think it's the creating safe learning environments which are mistake safe and where we're focused on kids learning and also themselves against themselves, if you know what I mean, rather than me compared to somebody else in my class. We're all on learning journeys. We might all start in different places. We're not all going to end up with 100%, but it's thinking about how we're all improving. And that to me is more beneficial.
Yeah, thank you. We had quite a few questions from one attendee. So I'll just start with the first one here. Can you say a little bit more about how the children were selected? Do you think that the selection process can have an impact on the results?
Yeah, definitely. So this project has been kind of steadily growing. We've done the best we can, but like I say, we tend to go in and we don't pick the kids because of the funding we've had. The funding has been tied to disadvantaged kids. So we've had to think about how we can work within those constraints. Yes, there probably is something about those 10 children feeling special because they're off timetable for a week. They're with university student facilitators or university lecturers. That's potentially beneficial for them as well. So, I mean, it would be lovely to go in and to select kids out a little bit more randomly because, of course, the teachers will sometimes pick people they think will benefit as well. So they won't necessarily pick the kids they think are going to sit up the back and be grumpy all day. They pick the kids that they think will come round eventually. We have gone to some schools where we've tested the whole year group. So we worked in a school in London where we had literally every single person in year 9. Yes, year 9 writing this book. So I think we had 6 books running in the same week in this school, which was absolutely wild. I would love to be able to be a little bit more controlled. That's something we'd like to do as the funding developed. But when we first started, it was very much like, we've got this funding, can you give us some kids? But now we're building that trust. People know us better. And then that's allowing us to do, I think, tighter research, which is what we're working on now. And Richard's been able to do that a bit more through the funding we've had at Kiel.
Mm-hmm. And I think a follow-up question from the same person was about, I think, how do you distinguish between growth mindset and self-efficacy? So is this intervention on self-efficacy? What's the difference? And can you distinguish and disentangle those two concepts?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, isn't it? So growth mindset is the belief that you can grow and change. Self-efficacy is that you are good at. So that would be kind of my way of understanding them. I know that's not maybe perfect, but that's, you know, you might have your self-efficacy is that I am a smart person, but that might be fixed because I might think I'm a smart person and I believe that some people are smarter than others. So that would be my kind of view of the difference between the two. But I do think the self-efficacy is very important because obviously, even if I believe that intelligence can change, I might not know how to change my intelligence. You know, I might think, well, yeah, people can get smarter and I see my friends getting better grades over time, but I'm not. And I don't know how to do that. I maybe need some support from my teachers. And this is one of the most common things with growth mindset is people think it's all about hard work. And yes, it is partly about hard work, but it's also about techniques. It's about support. It's about, you know, the kind of environment around you. And if you don't understand a threshold concept, it doesn't matter how hard you work and how much everyone goes, keep working hard, you're not going to get smarter from it. So it's not just about hard work, it's about techniques, it's about readiness, it's about the people around you. I've just gone off on a little tangent because I said that. What was I saying? Self-efficacy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I think they are interrelated as concepts, and that's something that we're looking at now. So in our latest version of the questionnaire with a control group, we have self-efficacy and mindset measures separately, and we'll be able to look at that in a bit more detail. But that's a really good point. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? I have a question. So obviously I'm a bookworm, so I'm very interested in this Whitewater Writers project. And I wondered, looking at the pictures and listening to your explanations, what would you think is the most difficult step for the pupils in this entire process of developing that novel?
It's different for different kids or different people. Some people really enjoy the planning. They really like it. They love coming up with loads of ideas, and they love, all the big picture thinking, and they love the planning. And Monday's great because they don't feel like they're really working, but they're planning, but they don't feel like they're working hard. So some of them love Mondays, and then when they've got to actually get the words on the paper, that feels like more of a slog. Whereas other kids tend to find that quite difficult because there's a lot of negotiation. There's a lot of discussion going on. You've got your ideas, someone else has their ideas, maybe your ideas make it in, maybe they don't. So there's a little bit of tension there. So they find that difficult. But once they can get on with the writing and start, doing that, it's that's what they enjoy. So I think the difficult bit for kids tends to vary, but quite often Thursday is the difficult day, proofreading day. By that point, they've had to negotiate. They've worked together quite a lot. They get a bit tired. The end is in sight, but it's not quite here yet. So when we train the facilitators, we say quite often Thursday is argument day, just to be prepared for it. But I will say that for the facilitators, Monday is quite a challenge because you're still reading the room and you're getting to know everybody. By the end of Wednesday, the book exists. It might have varying levels of quality. So the facilitators are relaxing as the week goes on. The writers are getting more and more anxious about the final product. But if you do it well, you start off on the Monday where they do a lot of looking at you. And then by the end of the week, you're just kind of sitting there and the kids are self-organizing. Did you check chapter 16? Oh, hang on a second. I think so-and-so's that, you know what I mean? So by that point, ideally, you want to be doing nothing. And the kids themselves are just running around, organizing and then finalizing everything themselves.
Thank you. So Maxine Swingler, she's at University of Glasgow, a colleague of mine, and she has actually posted a recommendation for a paper by York and Knight in 2007 on mindset, self-efficacy, and employability. So if people want to check this out, I'm going to look at that too and just also add it to the reflection post that I'm going to write about this webinar. But then she also has a question. Do you think that your university intervention would be useful as part of students' professional skills training?
If you mean the first mindset type one, then potentially yes. Or Maxine, do you mean the Whitewater Writers one? Because we have run that with university students, and students have produced novels, and that has allowed them to access grant funding, which is only available to published authors. So we have had some of our writers continue on into further writing careers. And we have also had some of our facilitators who have helped kids to produce books go on into teaching and things like that. So, students have been involved in lots of different ways, which has enhanced their employability.
I think Maxine has just unmuted herself so she can ask her.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so hi Yvonne. Caroline, I already know Yvonne from in a different role. So it was, I think I was thinking mostly about the first intervention that you mentioned. Unfortunately, I got called away while you were presenting that bit of the talk. But I think if there was an aspect of that you think would be useful for not only first year students, but maybe students who are third honours years who are considering sort of what's ahead of them in the world of work, and if anything from your work would be useful. But equally, I hadn't really thought about the novel in a week, but actually that would also be if you had the time to do it with them, another excellent way of, I think, as you say, increasing the self-efficacy as well as mindset. So thank you.
I mean, it has. Thank you, Maxine. Yeah, it has been definitely beneficial. So one of our writers actually is now in professional writing. And also, if anybody here knows of anybody who's good at illustrations, we're always looking for cover illustrators. We've got a really good one now, but we're using them quite a lot. So if anybody has any particularly artistic techniques, either as like drawers or photography or things like that, and you might want to do covers, we can pay for covers, not a huge amount. So if you know of anyone, please get them in touch with me as well, because that's another way in which people can improve their employability by being cover artists.
All right, so we have a few more questions. I think we had a comment by Richard Zimmer, just also adding in to your answer, that the most difficult part of a writing week is them realizing no one is going to tell them what to write, and they really are not used to that autonomy.
Yeah.
So,
we have had sometimes where they think there's some sort of magic book that they're just going to make some changes in, or there's some sort of magical formula. So that is quite fun. And at the beginning, they do a lot of miss, should this happen? Miss, should this happen? And you spend a lot of time in day one just going, not my problem, not my problem. And to start off with, yeah, that is quite scary for them. But then it does create a kind of sense of, well, I wrote that in a week, what can I do in a term? What can I do in, a longer period? But yeah, I agree with Richard that that's always quite funny when they think there's some sort of magic trick, and then they realize that they got to do the work.
Another question by Faith, asking what techniques as a teacher can I implement to ensure my kids have a growth mindset? I know the one that you mentioned is environment, but are there any others?
Sure. I think it's a challenge because, like I said, the education system is not really set up in a particularly growth mindset-y way. I think using feedback to promote growth mindsets, and that means particularly focusing on what students have done that's led to their achievements. So, this is a really good piece of writing. Well done for checking for capital letters, or well done for carefully planning it. That gives the student something that they know they've done, rather than just saying, this is great, well done, or you're great, well done. Well, how did I get great? How do I stay great? What can I do to be great in the future? So the more kind of process-based, so about what they've actually done rather than what they are, is really helpful for kids. And it also takes the focus away from me being bad at it, and instead me not planning, or me not proofreading, or me not thinking about it in that way. So I think feedback is one thing. I think modeling can be quite helpful as well. So, being willing to, depending on the age of the kids, being willing to talk about mistakes that you've made, or to, I have teachers who make mistakes when they write on the board, so the kids can say, oh, miss, actually, I think that word's wrong. And then she gets the dictionary out and she checks it, and then she makes the, the change on the board. So those sorts of things can be really beneficial. And I met a woman at a conference once, and she called herself the oops queen. It's a very American sort of approach to failure, but she really flagged up her children's failures. So when the children made a mistake that was a sensible mistake, she would say, oh my gosh, Sophie made a great whoops today because she spelt this wrong. She used her I before E except after C rule, but this is one of the ones that isn't one of those. Well done on a good oops. So I'm not saying you necessarily want to firework all the failures, because I don't think that would work for a lot of kids, but sometimes, creating environments where that's a really sensible failure, and here's some of mine, those sorts of things. And we've been doing some work, we were doing some work at Kiel on a bit like academic dark CVs, or sharing failures, whereas academics, we go, do you know what, I had a paper rejected this week, I've worked really hard on it, and my reviewer said, that this, that, and the other, and it made me feel this way, and so I thought about this. I think sometimes normalizing, instead of us all kind of promoting this perfect view, normalizing our failures and our development can be really beneficial as well.
Yeah, I really like that last point, actually, because you just see the current status of a person, right? Like standing in front of you, teaching you, but how the person got there. Obviously, there were obstacles, but to talk about these can be really beneficial for a classroom. So Laura had a question, but I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Laura, that it was answered by Yvonne as she answered the previous question. And then we have a question from Helena, also one of my colleagues. And she asks whether this kind of intervention could be, for example, used to work together collaboratively on shorter academic focused pieces.
Yeah, we've not tried this before. We could look at doing something on in a shorter time. We've typically focused on fiction because you don't need to have pre-read a lot. I think if you were to do a paper or something in a day, then you would have to come in having read and prepared a lot. I'm not saying you couldn't do that, but it would require a lot more. Whereas on Monday, the kids come in with nothing and they work everything up. So that would be possible. I think it might be a bit trickier because, like I said, we have the narrative of the character running through, and that means that I need to know that, you know, the hero does this, and then she does that, and then she does this, and that's how we get consistency of voice. Otherwise, if they do chapters, it reads very differently. But I think if you were to iterate and move through sections together, I mean, potentially we could look at something like that. It would be quite fun. I think a few people have said to me they'd like to do Whitewater Writers, but it's quite a big commitment. And we have done it in a shorter period of time. We've done it in 4 days when there's bank holidays, and we have done it in 3.5 days. This book was produced by theatre practitioners in 3.5 days, but it's really intense. And you can see it's a lot shorter, and it's really hard work to try and get it all done. So I think, yeah, I mean, we'd be open. Should we have a go? Let's see. I'm always up for trying something new and seeing what we can do.
Okay, so are there any other questions? Anything else? We will produce, so this has been recorded, and we will produce a blog post where we summarize the most important parts, and in that post on our Tile website, we will have as well the video posted, so I can share this with you if you haven't subscribed to our website yet, so you don't miss the announcement of new talks or when we post those reflection posts. We will also add some links of some of the books that Yvonne Skipper, that she mentioned in her talk today. Oh, there's another question from Tara, my former colleague from Dundee. So what you worked on is literacy based. Have you done any research on whether your interventions have an impact on other areas of the curriculum? And if so, what are these impacts?
Yeah, we haven't really focused on other areas of the curriculum because this was developed as an aspiration and literacy intervention. So we wanted to get kids better at writing, but we wanted to create the sense of, well, I've done this, what else can I do? But we have linked it to other areas of the curriculum. So for example, we have had books set in World War I, and the kids have had to do the research to make sure that it's, you know, historically correct. So we have had a few historic books. We've had books that have to feature a Byronic heroine. So we have tied in with different time periods and things like that, but we haven't really looked at the impact that has had. I think that would be interesting. But yeah, it's not really something that we've done so far. But yeah, I mean, I think it does have kind of crossover benefits, and when the kids do write historically, it's quite fun for them because they're able to bring in, you know, some of their other learning, and they tend to quite enjoy those sorts of stories as well. So yeah, I think that would be worthwhile, but I haven't looked at it yet. No.
All right. Then at this point, would like to say thank you again. It was an amazing and very interesting talk. I think everyone enjoyed it very much.